So today we're going to be making pizza. Making the bread dough is very similar to garlic dough balls and any other bread dough that you might be making. Obviously with the difference of adding pizza toppings. Today's objectives: you need to learn how to follow a recipe. You've got to make sure you do this in order because making bread dough is not easy. You need to make sure that you're kneading your bread dough effectively, and that's really important because it needs to be really nice and soft. If it's not soft, your pizza's going to taste a bit like cardboard, and we don't want that. And then learning why we need and what it does. Standard health and hygiene always applies. Make sure you wash your hands, wipe down your work surfaces, make sure everything's nice and clean, ready to go. Get out all your equipment. On the recipe there is an equipment list that you're going to need, and you need to get out all your ingredients. You can choose what toppings you want to add, entirely up to you. Plain cheese is perfectly fine. If you've got any other toppings, then feel free to get those out and add them accordingly. Okay, over to the recipe. So first thing we need to do is making sure that we are weighing out our ingredients. You need to use strong white flour. Okay, it won't work so well with plain flour. It needs to be strong. It's got more gluten in. It's going to bring it together as a dough a little bit better, and it helps to activate the yeast. So yeast works by taking the sugar from the mix. That's what helps activate the yeast. And the yeast then starts to create carbon dioxide gas. That carbon dioxide creates the bubbles that you need to make your bread nice and light and fluffy. So once you've got your flour, you need to make sure you keep mixing in the salt and the sugar that you should have added by now. How much salt and sugar you need is on the recipe, 1 teaspoon of each. And now the tricky bit. So I have measured 100 millilitres of warm water, and I'm going to add my yeast to the water. Not everybody does this, but I find it activates the yeast a little bit quicker. So here's my yeast. There's my 1 teaspoon that you need, and it's going in. And I'm going to give that a good old mix up. You should, if the water's warm enough, you should, after giving that a good mix for a minute, start to get a bit of a froth on top of the water. That's good. That means the yeast is activating. You can see we're starting to get a few bubbles in our pot of warm water and yeast. And now the yeast needs some sugar. And it takes some sugar from the sugar teaspoon that we've placed into our bowl already. And it also takes the sugar from the starch that is in the flour. So this bit is really tricky. You need to add in your yeast and water to your flour. Do not do it all in one go. A little bit at a time, and then you can mix with your hands. If you do it all at one time, what happens is it's going to be so sticky, you're going to add more flour, and then you're going to take the balance away of the different ingredients. We don't really want to be adding flour unless we have to. And then once you've had a good mix, we can add a little bit more. And the good thing is if you feel like your dough's coming together really nicely, you don't have to use that last bit of water and yeast. You can stick with what you've got. If you have mixed all your ingredients together, you will start to get a dough that looks like this. Now, if you feel your dough is a little bit hard, the way to soften it up, and this may sound strange, the way to soften it up is to beat it, okay? The technique of beating that I find works best is if you roll it up into a ball and then you throw it down really hard onto your work surface, and just keep repeating that, and just keep repeating, and then it should soften up your dough. And you want it as soft as possible. That's what's going to make your dough balls really, really light. So I've been doing this for about 5 minutes now, and you can see already how much softer my dough is. Another 5 minutes should do it. So I'm up to about 7 minutes now. And as you can see, it's going really, really soft. So just like that, down hard, then give it a squash, roll it out, and then go again. Keep going. Just be careful it doesn't go off your work surface to the floor, because then you have to start the whole process again. And we are nearly there. What this is doing is that it's keeping the dough nice and warm. That impact is creating heat. And that's the heat that we need to keep in that dough to keep the yeast activated. That's really crucial, otherwise your bread's going to be really, really stodgy. So when you're happy and your dough's nice and soft, I'm really quite pleased with that. Looks nice and soft and squashy, that's what we want. The kneading process. This is one of the objectives today. It's really tricky to get right. So here's the demo. Dough's in a ball, palm on top, you push into the table, like so, fold over on itself, and push with your palm again. Fold over on itself, and push. Over, push. Over, push. And the quicker you can do this, the warmer it stays, and the even softer your dough will be. Have a go. So after you have kneaded your dough, after you have beat your dough up, it should be nice and soft. And that is perfect. So we're now going to place our dough back inside our bowl and cover it with a clean tea towel. And then that goes in your proving drawer. Or if you haven't got a proving drawer, it goes somewhere in your kitchen that's nice and warm. It has to be warm. Okay, so you may want to put your oven on and put it at the back of the oven where the heat starts to escape. But it needs to be somewhere nice and warm. If you can leave it for around 90 minutes, that would be perfect. If you're unable to prove because you're short of time, you just need to be leaving it for about 10 to 15 minutes to settle. Okay. So I explained that if you haven't got time to prove, what you can do is that after you've kneaded your dough, place it in your bowl, put your tea towel over the top like you would do normally ready to prove, leave it for 5 or so 10 minutes in a nice warm place. At that point, take your tea towel back off, get your dough back out again, and then give it a really good, quick, hard knead, okay? And that will soften the dough up. You may at this point want to add a little bit of warm water and maybe an extra dusting of flour on your work surface. That will soften the dough up. You need to make sure your dough is as soft as possible. If you're in a rush, this is a little method to speed the process up. Okay, quick take 5 for you. Question 1, where was pizza discovered? Question 2, what is passata? And question 3, what part of the Eat Well guide does bread dough fit into? As you can see, the dough, after it's proved, has doubled in size. Okay, a bit crusty on the outside. What we now need to do is a process called knocking back. And all that is kneading again. So let's give that a go. So after you have knocked back your dough, and it's back to its soft original size, now you need to break your dough out into different small size balls ready for the garlic to go on top. Okay, once you've knocked back your dough, you then need to roll it out with a rolling pin into a pizza shape. So we're going to roll that dough out, keep twisting it as we go. So we make a nice thin base for your pizza. The problem with having a deep pan pizza with fresh dough that we've made is that it can take a little while to cook. So I'd recommend keeping your base thin, otherwise you're going to have a raw dough and we don't want that. So we've rolled out our dough into the shape that we want. The next thing is to add your tomato puree or passata. I haven't got any tomato puree, so I'm going to use passata. And passata is just as good. In my opinion, it tastes better. This is how the Italians make their pizza, with passata rather than tomato puree. But you want to be quite sparse with the passata because it's quite a liquidy substance, so you don't want to put it on too thick. So as I said, passata is quite a liquid, so I'm going to pour it into a ladle, because a ladle is how the Italians spread it all out, and it's also a really good way of making a nice spread even coat, because you can use the bottom of the ladle, as you can see, to spread around your tomato, just like that. A bit more if you want it more tomatoey, a bit less if you want it a bit less tomatoey. So then transfer your pizza onto a baking tray, and then you're going to grate your cheese all over the top. and add any toppings that you want. And then you're going to need to bake it for a little while, so about 12 to 15 minutes, but just be careful because the outside edges here will start to burn because they don't have the passata over the top. The passata is quite a watery mix, so it takes that little bit longer to cook. When you're ready, after you put your cheese on top, put it in the oven, enjoy. So I've got the cheese all over the pizza. If you wanted to have a bit of a play, you could think about stuffed crusts. And if you're going to stuff your crust, you have to roll over the crust and put your cheese inside. Put any toppings on, and then you need to bake it in the oven. So the pizza's had the allotted amount of time to cook, but because the passata is quite watery, I think that some of the water's probably soaked into the dough. So I'm going to leave it in for an extra couple of minutes, just so those edges of the pizza there just start to brown up a little bit, because I don't think it's quite ready yet. So it was definitely the right decision to leave it on a little bit longer because those edges have really crisp up nicely. But I know that the pizza is still cooked underneath. It comes off the tray quite easily, and after having a look underneath a second ago, it's a nice pale colour. That's what we need. So slice it up, serve, enjoy. So just proof, you can see the underside of the pizza is a lovely pale colour. Good, nice and fresh. If anything, maybe a little bit more cheese I needed, as I can taste a bit more tomato than I personally like. The more you practice, the more you can decide how much cheese you put on. And a little crack of black pepper, I think, is what it needs. So here's your answers. Pizza was discovered in Napoli, which is in Italy. Passata is uncooked tomatoes with all the seeds from the tomatoes removed. And bread dough fits into the carbohydrate section.